Welcome to Father John's Coffee Break. So today is Monday, the beginning of the week. But I don't know about you, but I find the first 5 days of the week always the hardest. So what I'd like to talk this morning is a brief formation of the Bible. So the Bible, the most read book in history, was not just written by one or two people in a couple of days. It's the product of a long history. So the Hebrew Bible, or the Old Testament as most refer to it, is a history of the relationship between Israel and God. And the New Testament is the story of the new Israel being the followers of Christ and God. And there's a continuity between the Hebrew scriptures and the Christian scriptures. One leads into the other. For example, the suffering servant Psalms in Isaiah describes perfectly the ministry of Jesus and his role on the cross. And so the continuity of God's action flows from the Hebrew scriptures to the Christian scriptures. So the people who wrote the Bible just didn't think on the spot, what do we write about? Oh, I know, we'll write the Bible. And so it didn't happen that way. It began by them asking very profound questions. The perennial questions that every generation asks is, who are we? Why are we here? Why is the world the way it is? Who made the world? And so their speculations were inspired by God, and hence we refer to the Bible as inspired writings. As we begin, it's important to note that the concept of authorship is nothing like the modern day concept. In biblical times, if you wrote a text and you wanted people to read it, you put a famous name on it. And so, like many of the Psalms, they weren't written by David, but David's name was put on them. So people say, oh, look, a Psalm from David, let's read it. And so that's how you got people to read your work. You put not your name, but a famous name on it. And so the authors hoped by connecting it to a famous person, their writing would become popular. The Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, it was at one time thought that these were written by Moses. But in 1951, there was the Pope had a biblical commission inquiring into the authorship of the Pentateuch. And it concluded that since Moses' death is recorded in the Pentateuch, he probably wasn't the only author of the Pentateuch. So, who sparked the modern upsurge in biblical scholarship? You'd be very surprised. Napoleon Bonaparte, of all people. How come, you say? Well, what happened was Napoleon, he went on a campaign to Egypt, a disastrous one, as it turned out. So but he took with him a lot of different scholars. And so when he got to Egypt, one of the things they discovered was the Rosetta Stone. And so the inscription on it, and they wanted to translate it. And this, especially when it got back to Paris, this caused an explosion in scholarship of biblical languages, the Semitic languages of the Bible. And so Napoleon was indirectly responsible for the Bible scholarship, the great upsurge in it, which we are very thankful today for all that he started. And so one of the people that inherited this and was a famous figure in biblical scholarship was Julius Wellhausen. And so through his studies, he discovered that there was actually 4 traditions in the Pentateuch: J, E, D, and P. And the first 2, J and E, refer to the name that God was given in the text. So Yahweh and Elohim. And so the D, it comes from Deuteronomy, and it's a kind of a history, and so all the history was put into D, Deuteronomic history. And then the last one, P, the priestly tradition, and they had the final redaction of all these 4 traditions together. And so the Wellhausen, he showed how they were all the traditions were merged together. So this is a book, it's Ellis, the Men and Message of the Old Testament. And so the different colours on this represents the different traditions, how they were merged together. And so so he's gone through the books, and he's shown where the traditions are. The Pentateuch was basically put together during the time of the exile, because there they were in Babylon, away from their home, and they thought, we have to preserve the faith. And so the priestly tradition was gathered all the other 3 traditions, and they merged them into one. But they were very concerned not to lose any of the traditions. And that's why there's repetition, because you might have a story from the J, and you might have a story from the E, but they put them both in. They didn't say, oh, we've done that one, let's cut it. They wanted to preserve all the traditions, and so they kept it first. And of course, the priestly scholars, they were the redactors, the last redactors. And of course, they used their privilege that they put all their material up front. So that's the privilege of the person who does the final redaction of something. They put their stuff prominent. And so that's why in Genesis we get the priestly tradition first, because God created the world in 6 days, and then he rested on the 7th, and that's because Sabbath worship. And so that's what the priests were interested in. And then there's another story right after it from the J tradition, which is 4 centuries older than the priestly tradition. And it's the potter and the clay. And so, but the priestly, having the final redaction, they put their material right up their front. And so that's how the Bible came to be, or the Pentateuch came to be written as it was. And so it's the 4 traditions being brought together and preserved for posterity. So the Hebrew Bible, the Hebrew Scriptures, they're divided into 3 parts. You have the Pentateuch, also known as the Law, and in Hebrew, the Torah. And then you have the prophetic writings, which are Nevi'im, and then you have other writings, which is called Ketuvim. And so there's a little mnemonic to remember it, Tanakh. So Tanakh, T, Torah, and Nevi'im, and K, Ketuvim. And those are the 3, how the Bible is split. But in Jesus' time, they didn't refer to the 3. They only just refer to the law and the prophets. So anytime you see that in the Bible, in the scriptures, the law and the prophets, you have heard in the law and the prophets, he's referring to scripture. That's the way they refer, because they didn't have the term Bible. Bible is a Greek word, it comes much, much later. And so that's how Jesus and all the others referred to scripture, was the law and the prophets. Now, Paul used a version of the Bible called the Septuagint. And so this name comes because it was translated from Hebrew into Greek by 70 scholars, hence the name Septuagint, so sept for 70. And so this is the Bible that Paul used. And but what happened was, after the fall of Jerusalem, some Pharisees met in council at Jamnia. And so they were looking at the canon of Scripture. The canon of Scripture means the books that are classified as being kosher. These are the ones, this is the list of the books of the Bible. And so what they did was, 7 of the books weren't translated from Hebrew. So they discarded those. They only kept the Hebrew books. And so in the Reformation, what happened was that the reformers, they adopted the canon from Jamnia and rejected these 7 books as well. And that's the difference between a Catholic Bible and a Protestant Bible. The Catholic Bible holds on to the Septuagint, the Bible that Paul used. And here is an irony, because the reformers, they tend to favour Paul and put a lot of emphasis on Paul, whereas Catholics put more emphasis on the Gospels. But that's where the 2 different Bibles come from. And in modern Bibles, the Protestant Bibles, they put the 7 books at the end as either the Apocrypha or Deuterocanonical, and so they still retain them. So the New Testament focuses on the life of Jesus and the New Covenant. Although both testaments are important, they are combined to form the modern Bible. The Christian Bible was finished when the New Testament was complete. Therefore, the Bible was not completed until the 2nd century. The original texts of the New Testament are lost. So all we have is a copy of a copy of a copy. We don't have the original, which is kind of very unfortunate. And one of the biggest mistakes that people make when reading the Bible is they read it as Western literature. It's not Western at all. It's very much Eastern literature coming out of an Eastern mind, which is a very different mindset to the Greco-Roman mindset that we are brought up in. And so you have to read it very differently. Mostly what they try to do is paint an image. The writings are there to paint an image, and so not specific facts as such, like as the Greco-Roman world. They just want facts, and it's the Eastern writing is very different. So and one of the problems as well is translation. When you translate from one language to another, things don't translate over. Like we have various idioms. It's a grey day. You say that to someone from continental Europe, and they say, what do you mean by that? It's the sun shining. What do you mean? It doesn't translate over. One example was I was at a meeting of the Sacred Hearts in France, and at mealtime, one of the one of the French guys asked me, had I had enough to eat? And I was using my best schoolboy French. And I said, Je suis plein. And they all roared around laughing. And I just thought it was my bad pronunciation of French. And then one of them told me, in French, that means I'm pregnant. So idioms and that don't translate over very well. Now, what's interesting in English Bibles, the Tyndale's translation of the Bible gave us various turns of phrase that's very appealing to us. Such as, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Seek, and you will find. Judge, not that you be judged. My brother's keepers. Tyndale, when he was translating, used his poetic leaning to make these translations and gave them a little jingle that's very pleasing to the ear. Now, however, Tyndale was burnt at the stake for being a heretic, but many of the translators who came after him used his translation because it's more pleasing to us. And so it might not be so correct, but it's very pleasing to the ear. And so this is another thing you have to take into consideration when reading the Bible. Who translated it? What is the translation? And to really get at what the words of the Bible say, we have to read them in the original languages. It's the only way to get to the heart, because every translator puts his own kind of stamp on the translation. When I was at college, we always used the Jerusalem Bible to read the Hebrew scriptures, and the RSV, the Revised Standard Bible, to read the New Testament. And so it's because they are the better translations of those two languages. And so it's so that's kind of a brief synopsis of how the Bible came to be. And but it is the most important book we read.